Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Aline Stukart, happy to be your host for our final LinkedIn Live session for higher education. And with me, our wonderful expert, Mike. How are you, Mike?
Hey, doing wonderful. Looking forward to this last session. I've enjoyed every single one of these that we've done, Aline. It's been enjoyable to interact with all the folks that have asked questions and things like that. So hopefully we'll keep that trend going.
Absolutely. Mike, today's session gives me a little bit of a headache. I'll be honest about it. When we talk about data harvesting, it's not on my dream task side of the house. So can you tell us a little bit about how at least to be a little more effective with that?
Sure. Yeah. When we talk about data harvesting specifically, and this is I'm gonna use something that I always taught when I was teaching CIS courses as a professor. There's always the one thing you teach your students the first time out is that data is data. It's just a bunch of stuff, but it doesn't become information until you've manipulated it and drawn a conclusion from it and sorted it and done all the things you do with it, right? And so it's important to understand that in a network, data comes in all different forms and in fashions, right? A lot of times, and the reason why you might have a headache is that anybody that's a network operator knows that to find a problem in a network in general in the old days, it was very difficult. You'd have to take sniffer traces and look at packets that were going through the network. It's difficult. It's not easy. It's not intuitive. You have to hire a lot of expensive people to go find the needle in the haystack. In fact, what I will tell you is that when it comes to things like this, and networking, to get, like, for example, a particular certification with one of the larger vendors out there, that what they do to test you is when you're taking the final test is they will take something in the network and take one little bit and flip it from on to off or whatever, and it breaks the network, right? And so that's your job in the test, is to try to figure out how to fix the network. And I always have said, anything that is that complicated that you can take one little thing and move it and have it destroy your network is not the way to go, right? And so Juniper has done a huge service to the networking industry with how we've approached data, how we've approached automation in general.
So you touched a little bit on troubleshooting there. I want to say, if you're fixing a system that it's broke, how can it actually help in that sense?
Yeah, so let's talk about a couple of scenarios for you, right? If you're sitting here, for example, on the Wi-Fi edge, a lot of times, and I know in previous broadcasts, we've actually mentioned the fact that a lot of times people just come on campus and say the Wi-Fi stinks and they had a bad experience, right? And again,
I love how polite you are.
yeah, thank you. But they'll say that the Wi-Fi is a problem, and it may not be the Wi-Fi. There's a long train of things that it could be that could cause an issue in the network, right? And so in Wi-Fi in general, there's a lot of stuff that can happen in terms of whether it's the coverage or whether it's the person not being able to authenticate or whatever. Those are all issues that have to be looked at, right? And trouble ticketing in general is very difficult. I mean, one trouble ticket can easily take days to figure out. And on top of that, you're dragging somebody in that doesn't want to be a part of your IT staff. He's the user that's having the bad experience, right? And so that's how we look at it differently. We try to say, when we talk about all the stuff that it takes to solve this issue, you need to be able to have something in the background that can basically correlate and do the hard work of sifting through the mounds, the terabytes of data that might be out there, just to be able to help them solve the problem and let the experience dictate what goes on with that user. Let the experience be, hey, we by the way, we found out that you had an issue here before they even really knew. They might have saw the little circle on their phone, but you'd now be able to go back and look at it and say, hey, that. So on the Wi-Fi side, there's lots of data there. I mean, there's telemetry that needs to be accessed, and there's situations where when you're talking about the Wi-Fi itself, it's more than just being green, the light being green and being on. There's a lot of other things that have to be going on there. And what do you want to do if you want to start diagnosing that issue, right? And this is where ServiceNow, for example, had 100 trouble tickets a month, but when they implemented our stuff in Wi-Fi, they were down to 2 trouble tickets a month, and actually driving to 0, because they are taking advantage of AI and machine learning, which I can talk about a little bit more if you'd like. But that's the deciding factor of how to take this data. Number one, it has to be available. Telemetry and whatever data points have to be available, but then you need something to be able to parse it, make it into information, change data into information, and create a result.
No, that's fantastic. So I understand when we talk directly on the impact of Wi-Fi and user experience and the network itself, but putting together all the previous sessions that we talked, can you apply data harvesting to the actual campus, the physical environment?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when we talk about actually harnessing the power of artificial intelligence and machine learning, okay, into the network, this is a key point. There's 4 things that I always tell people when I talk about how to harness this, because again, you have to change your thinking and thought process to what has been done before, which is, let me go figure out something in the controller. Let me go figure out what's going on. Let me dispatch somebody with a wand. Let me go grab the person. It's got to be done differently. So what should happen here are 4 things in general. Number one, you should be able to have insights into what is going on. Okay. And the key term that we've always said here at Juniper is that just remember one thing. Just because it's up doesn't mean it's good, right? Up does not mean good. If the user experience isn't good, then it's bad. It doesn't matter if a green light is on. So first of all, you need to be able to have the insight into the networks. That's the first step of harnessing that power of AI, is that something should be able to give you insights into what's going on in the network, looking at all that background data, whether it's location information, whether it's logs that are on every access point about the ins and outs and what they do every minute, 150 data points in and out, pre and post, all of that, right? That's a lot of data. You don't want to look at that. You want something to be able to tell you. So insight is the first thing. The second thing is the actual assurance, right? Inside of this, when you harness this power, you want to make sure that the network itself, you have the assurance that things are going to work the way you want them to work, that they're going to be up. So think about critical services. A lot of universities have medical centers that are attached. These are things that are 24/7, cannot go down, right? You need to be able to have the assurance that when something has reared its head, whether it's an upgrade that has gone bad or whatever, you need to be able to find something that's going to catch that and provide the users of the network the assurance that it's going to be there. The third thing is automation. So automation is really important from the standpoint of, you don't want to go and take, and I've done this as an engineer in my long past, taking a long sniffer trace and trying to figure out what packet did what and where did it go, and then trying to draw some kind of a conclusion, right? I'll give you an example. A lot of times in a wireless network, for example, the real problem isn't the Wi-Fi. It's that somebody downstream on a switch didn't configure a VLAN properly on one of their switches. And so because the VLAN's not there, the service that the person's using is not good. I mean, because their service isn't available on the switch. It looks like the Wi-Fi stinks because it's got this little circle going, but it's really the VLAN, right? And so automation means being able to say, you know what? I have just noticed immediately that there is a VLAN missing on this switch. That's pretty simple. That's a machine command. You can have AI say, oh, I realize the VLAN's gone. I will repair it and I'll make sure the VLAN is there. Appearance goes up, and really take the individual having to key in a host of commands out of it, right? And so that automation piece is the third key component. And then the last thing about all this data, and when you want to harness it, is to be able to apply relevance to it, right? So I've talked to you just for the moment about data that's coming in about the telemetry of what's going on, or whether a VLAN is up or down, but there's really more than that, right? Relevance is being able to apply it toward an application and take that data and to convert it into something relevant. So, for example, when we did what we did earlier, when we had COVID first rear its ugly head, was to say, how can we make our information more relevant to the rest of the campus, right, in the world, and to be able to provide contact tracing and to be able to understand that we can support that effort. And places like MIT and Dartmouth found this immensely useful to be able to help them to keep their campuses safe, because everything is being done in terms of understanding that in the movements on campus, the data is being collected of what that device is doing, where they're going from building to building, to be able to take that relevance and then push it even to a student that has the need to make sure social distancing is being abided by, right? To be able to pull up an application and going, I'm going to go to the lunch area today, or I'm going to go to the student union. Oh my goodness, there's too many people there, right? So there's relevance to that. There's relevance to being able to, as a student, as a university administrator, to be able to look and see where their classes are and how many people are in the campus, in the buildings, on the floors, and in the rooms, to be able to say, you know what, we can maybe, now we're in the summer, let's take this one class, move it to this building. We can shut this whole building down and save on it and have economic savings, right? And so there's all of this that goes to relevance. And it's probably the most powerful part of what I consider to be the Juniper solution, is because of the fact that they do provide this huge amount of information about every individual, the devices, I should say, every individual device that's on campus, where it's going, so that anything like COVID, if somebody has been determined to have been infected and been on campus, you can actually track their device, and to be able to look where they've been over the last 30 days and look at who they've interacted with. Now, think about how much would have to happen as you and an individual, if you had to go do that you have manual contact tracers that you spend a lot of money for it called. Who were you around? Where were you? As opposed to being able to, again, attack the relevance portion with this information to know where these people are, where they are on campus, how long they dwelled in the campus, who they were near, to be able to inform the people that were near, that say, hey, you might want to get a COVID test. Hey, if you get symptoms, you might want to do what you need to do, or socially distance. So I know that's kind of a lot of information to throw at you, but those 4 tenets of harnessing the power of network and AI is something I always try to make sure everybody knows about when it comes to the relevance of data.
So Mike, as you were talking about it, I think the one thing that kept popping up in my head was, okay, so you talk about the cafeteria, the dorms, the classrooms. How is to implement a solution like that, right? To get to the point of data harvesting, there is the whole implementing. And like you said, someone didn't configure a piece of it in the right way, then, oh my God, how is it to implement something that it's going to go that broad across the campus?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Aline, what I find is this, okay, when you're talking about doing an implementation, again, it all depends on the architecture that has been selected. And this is why Juniper has gone to the top of the Gartner rankings in wired and wireless, absolutely to the top, right? It's because of the fact of what you just mentioned, is that instead of changing, doing what was the way of doing networking for the last 20 years, controllers and controllers and controllers. And if I wanted a little thing like telemetry, I have to go buy something, or Bluetooth, I got to go buy something, right? And then every time I wanted to go into a campus and say I wanted to implement a solution, you look at that and you go, oh my goodness, if I'm going to implement a solution, it's going to take me 6 months because of what has to be done in the background. As opposed to what we have selected, which is to really push everything to the cloud. So everything is its own individual entity. For one university, that they are absolutely loving what we did because of the simplicity of the cloud connection to our devices, to be able to roll out 2,000 access points in 48 hours and have every single one of them work. And they really only needed 24 hours because the student workers wanted extra meal the next day. So they let them do 400 of them the next day. But that gives you that kind of gives you the link into what we're talking about here when you asked about that campus question. To be able to go and insert in a hybrid mode with something that exists is not hard in our architecture, because everything is cloud-based. All things go up to the cloud and can be managed in a single place. It doesn't require you to have a data center full of servers to be able to manage even a simple thing like telemetry.
So now that you actually use the keyword there, data center. So we went through, the network itself, the campus. Now, if we go all the way to the data center from an automation perspective, is there a connection there that we can help with?
Oh, absolutely. So I always like to say this, Aline, AI has to be the way of life. Automation has to be what you need to do, right? And so when you look at, for example, in the data center, and people have complex, a lot of, especially universities, have complex architectures using EVP and VXLAN and creating fabrics and things like this. And what we have found, again, in the old way of doing things, is that if you look at the way a data center is architected from a network position, you got a network architect who does all the things that they do, right? Network architects go and say, here's how I design it. They're the designers, the builders. But what happens here is that the operators have to manage it. And then as they manage it, they find out maybe some things are missing. And so what Juniper has done in the data center specifically is to say, you know what, rather than try to say, here's my architecture and we hand it off and you implement a product and some operator has to go figure out what things to do. Instead, we should look at the intent that is meant for this, right? To be able to say, here's what I want to have happen. When I'm talking about my architecture, there should be what I want to have happen when I'm validating that architecture, the service visibility of that architecture, the operational changes that happen. It's that life cycle that you'll find, of which everything is tied together by the intent. That makes a lot more sense than here's my guy having to twiddle bits and find out what's going on. To be able to say, here is my intent for the data center. I want the fabric to work this way. I want the fabric to find itself, to be able to provide me better insights. In fact, in the data center, probably the biggest problem you have is that with all the devices, what's most important in the data center a lot of times is the telemetry, the information coming back about the health of the switches and all of this stuff, right? Again, just like in what I mentioned on the Wi-Fi side, the operators they're swamped with data. There's not a small amount of data here. We're talking more than what one person could ever consume. And so what has to happen is you need something that has like AI, machine learning. It has to have the ability to have, in the case of data center, a single source of truth that everybody agrees to. The intent is then propagated throughout, and then the intent is made to do that. I hope that makes sense. That we have phenomenal products that help that automation in the data center. Especially ones when we're dealing with EVP and VXLAN and creating fabrics, which kind of get us away from spanning tree and get us to everything being always on at all times. Yeah.
Mike, it definitely feels like you're making people's life a lot easier. But I will say this, I think each institution needs a different set of solutions, right? To make sure that it's ready for what's coming or what we're currently living in. So my question for you is, if an institution wants to find you, where can they find you next?
By the way, I'm always on the road nowadays. Even with COVID, I finally got permission. I'll be traveling next week to Texas. But you can always reach out to me at my email, mnewcomb@juniper.net. It's MNEWCOMB@juniper.net. I'm always interested in having the conversation. I'm not the sales guy. I am the person that hopefully will help frame the solutions in my role to help you understand what we're doing, how the overall architecture can look, and how you can take advantage of what we do throughout the chain, and how we infuse AI and machine learning and automation throughout our stack. I'm always able to show that, and as well as with the examples of we have a huge number of higher education customers that would be willing to even talk to them as well, and I can help bridge that gap.
That's fantastic. Any big events coming up then with all those trips?
So the biggest one that I've got coming up is EDUCAUSE. So I plan on being there. I've asked that we are presenting in person, so that's good. As long as EDUCAUSE doesn't change their mind. It's in Philadelphia in October. Please come look me up. My goal here, I think we got like a 10 by 30 booth there where we're going to have a lot of good things to show. If you want me to actually point you in the directions as we come, there'll be a station, for example, to show you how AI works in the Wi-Fi world. We'll have how to create a fabric. There's a lot of neat things that we're going to show that are actual real usable things, as opposed to just a rolling demo, right? This is like, let me show you this works. Because it's so easy, because it's so scalable, and it's all in the cloud, I can do it anywhere. And so my goal is that EDUCAUSE will be showing that off.
Mike, this is phenomenal. Thank you so much for participating on all these sessions. I definitely appreciate it. I've learned a lot throughout the whole process. But yeah, this might be the last one, or we might be talking in the background about how to do different things.
Absolutely.
But in the meantime, thank you so much for doing it.
Thanks, Aline. And one last thing, if anybody has any topics they'd like us to cover, certainly reach out to us. I'm happy to go down any path that we like to talk about the technology. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Take care.